Adam had never been fond of parties. To be honest, he downright loathed them. The artificial smiles, the constant hum of small talk, the endless sea of strangers whose conversations blurred into meaningless noise. It was exhausting. Yet here he was again, planted in the middle of a crowded room full of people he barely knew, doing his best to look engaged while every part of him ached to be anywhere but here. But this wasn't just any party. This was Brandon's party. Brandon, the old friend of Adam's wife, Jessica. The ever-charming, effortlessly charismatic host who seemed to have an endless stream of cash to pour into these over-the-top gatherings. Brandon, who lived in a house so extravagant it felt more like a modern palace than an actual home. Everything about his place screamed indulgence. From the glossy marble floors reflecting the warm glow of expensive chandeliers to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the glittering city skyline. The art that lined the walls wasn't just expensive. It was the kind of art meant to be admired in reverent silence. Abstract shapes and bold strokes of color that seemed to mock Adam with their excess. And the guests? They fit right in. Successful. Confident. The kind of people who had never known struggle, who spoke with the ease of those who had always belonged in places like this. They moved through the space like it was second nature because for them it was. Adam, however, didn't belong. As he always did at these events, he positioned himself near the outskirts of the room, keeping an eye on Jessica from a distance. She thrived in this environment, effortlessly weaving between conversations, flashing her radiant smile, laughing with ease. This was her world, not his. Adam, my man. He turned to see Brandon approaching. That trademark grin spread wide across his face. Brandon radiated confidence, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Adam made in a month. Having a good time? Brandon asked, though the smirk on his lips suggested he already knew the answer. Adam forced a polite smile. Sure. Brandon chuckled, shaking his head. You always look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Adam didn't argue, because Brandon wasn't wrong. But hey, Brandon went on, nodding toward the center of the room where Jessica was deep in conversation. At least Jessica's having fun. She always does, Adam replied, his voice quieter now. Brandon shot him a knowing glance. She's a natural at this. Always has been. Adam gave a small nod, but something about Brandon's tone made his stomach twist. He didn't like it. He wanted to leave, but leaving meant pulling Jessica aside and asking if she was ready to go. And he already knew the answer. She wasn't. She was in her element, soaking in the attention, completely wrapped up in the conversations and admiration that followed her wherever she went. Shifting uncomfortably, Adam watched as another group passed by, their laughter ringing in his ears. Bits of their conversation floated past him. Something about a luxury condo investment, something about a summer yacht trip off the coast of Italy. He had nothing to add. Adam, right? He turned toward the voice, finding himself face to face with a man whose suit fit like it had been made just for him, whose hair was styled in that effortless way that made wealth and sophistication look easy. Yeah, Adam said. I'm Evan. Pretty sure we met at one of Brandon's parties before. You're Jessica's husband. There it was again. Not Adam. Not what he did. Just Jessica's husband. Yeah, he said again, giving a small nod. Evan smirked. Lucky guy. She's the life of the party. Adam forced another polite smile. Yeah, she is. Evan took a slow sip of his drink, studying Adam for a moment before speaking again. You don't seem like the party type. I'm not, Adam admitted. Evan chuckled. Then why come? Adam hesitated, glancing back toward Jessica. She was still glowing, still laughing, still drawing in the attention of the room like a magnet. I come for her, he said simply. Evan raised an eyebrow, his smirk deepening slightly. That's admirable. But there was something else in his tone, something that sent an uneasy chill down Adam's spine. Evan didn't say another word. He simply gave a small nod before turning away, leaving Adam standing there alone with his thoughts. He exhaled sharply and turned back toward the bar, but the energy in the room, the flashing lights, the overlapping conversations, the relentless buzz of music pulsing through his skull, felt stifling. The air was thick with perfume and cologne, blending into something almost nauseating. Near the bar, a group of women huddled together, whispering and giggling as they cast knowing glances across the room. Adam's gaze flickered over them, and that's when he recognized one of them, Ashley, one of Jessica's close friends. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing. She was watching Jessica, and there was something in her expression that made Adam's stomach knot. Amusement. His brows furrowed, and he was just about to look away when a familiar name froze him in place. Jessica's always been like this, one of the women murmured, her voice hushed but not nearly quiet enough. She just loves being the center of attention. Another let out a soft, knowing laugh. She always has. Adam felt his chest tighten. He wasn't sure if they realized he was within earshot, but they certainly weren't making any effort to keep their voices down. It didn't matter, though. He already knew where he stood. He was the outsider here, the one who didn't fit, the one who lingered in the background while everyone else reveled in the spotlight. And as he turned his gaze back to his wife, still glowing, still effortlessly captivating, it struck him with unsettling clarity. He wasn't just an outsider. He was the punchline. The night had long since blurred into a haze of clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and the steady thrum of bass reverberating through the air. The party had taken on that surreal quality of an evening stretched too long. Conversations blending together, faces becoming indistinct, time slipping away unnoticed. Adam wasn't even sure how long it had been since he last saw Jessica. He could still picture her by the bar, flashing that effortless smile of hers. The last clear moment before everything around him faded into a slow, creeping awareness that something felt off. He shifted, scanning the crowded room, his fingers tightening around the untouched drink in his hand. Jessica was social, that much was a given. She thrived in spaces like this, effortlessly gliding between conversations, making every person she spoke to feel like they were the most interesting one in the room. But no matter how many people she charmed, she always found her way back to him. At some point, she'd glance his way and offer him that small, knowing smile, the silent reassurance that she hadn't forgotten him. Except tonight she hadn't, and now she was nowhere to be seen. A quiet unease coiled in his gut. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he quickly tapped out a message, hesitating for just a second before pressing send. Adam, where are you? He watched the screen, waiting. Any second now, those 3 dots would appear, some teasing reply about how he worried too much, how he needed to relax. But nothing came. The screen remained blank. His jaw tensed. He typed again. Adam. Hey, are you okay? Silence. A slow, heavy weight settled in his chest. Jessica always had her phone on her. She was never the type to miss a message, especially not from him. Especially not in a place like this, where she lived off the energy of constant conversation and attention. The silence wasn't just unusual. It was wrong. His eyes swept across the crowded space, searching for any sign of that shimmering dress, but she was nowhere in sight. Exhaling sharply, he set his glass down on a nearby table with a quiet clink and started moving through the sea of guests. His pace steady but purposeful. The bar was his first stop. Ashley was perched on a stool, a drink in hand, her eyes already on him before he even reached her. She was waiting, her lips curved slightly as he approached, something unreadable flickering in her expression. Hey, he said, doing his best to keep his voice even. Have you seen Jessica? Ashley's fingers drummed lightly against the rim of her glass, her gaze holding his for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with a slow, knowing tilt of her head, she spoke. She was here earlier, she said, her tone casual. Talking to Kevin. Adam's stomach twisted. He had already known that much. But the way she said it, the way her lips curved ever so slightly, made it clear. She was watching him closely, testing him, waiting to see how he'd react. And now, Adam pressed, his voice edged with impatience. Ashley tilted her head slightly, as if deep in thought, though the amusement in her eyes told a different story. Not sure, she finally said, her tone deliberately casual. Haven't seen her in a while. Something about the way she spoke sent irritation rippling through him. She knew. She knew exactly where Jessica was. But she wasn't going to tell him. Adam exhaled sharply, turning on his heel and pushing through the crowd, his patience hanging by a thread. He wasn't in the mood for games. And he sure as hell wasn't in the mood to be treated like an outsider at his own wife's party. With every passing second, the unease in his gut tightened like a slow-moving vice. His search had gone from frustrating to unnerving, and now it was creeping toward something far worse. His next stop was Brandon. If anyone knew what was happening at his own party, it was Brandon. That man made it his business to be aware of everything, the guests, the conversations, the movements. If Jessica was anywhere in this house, Brandon would know. Adam found him near the fireplace, surrounded by a group of men, all laughing at some joke he had just told. Brandon thrived in moments like these, commanding attention with the kind of effortless confidence Adam had never quite understood. Brandon! The laughter died down as Adam stepped forward. Brandon turned, his ever-present smirk already in place. "Adam, my man," he greeted smoothly. "You look tense." Adam wasn't interested in small talk. "Where's Jessica?" Brandon raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained by the directness of the question. "Lost her already?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "That's not like you." Adam exhaled through his nose, his patience hanging by a thread. "Brandon." This time his voice was lower, tighter. "Where is she?" Brandon studied him for a beat too long, as if debating whether to play along or drag this out for his own entertainment. Then, with a small, exaggerated sigh, he relented. "Oh," he drawled, stretching out the word just enough to make Adam's fists clench. "Yeah, I saw her go upstairs." Adam's stomach nodded. "Upstairs." Brandon nodded, unreadable now. "Yeah, with Kevin." The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. With Kevin. For a moment, Adam's entire body locked up. His mind blanked. The room around him blurred, the laughter and music fading into a distant, meaningless hum. Brandon was still watching him, still smirking. "Pretty sure I saw them heading that way a while ago," he added, as if the words were an afterthought. Adam barely registered them. His pulse pounded in his ears. His throat went dry. Every muscle in his body coiled tight. A volatile mix of disbelief, anger, and something dangerously close to realization. He had been looking for her. He had been worried. And all this time, she had been upstairs. Brandon hadn't stopped watching him. Hadn't stopped smirking. "Something wrong?" he asked, mock concern lacing his tone, though the amusement never left his face. Adam swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. His fingers curled into fists at his sides as he fought against the overwhelming wave of something dark and consuming, something he wasn't sure he could contain. Rage, humiliation, disbelief. His phone buzzed in his hand, and for one fleeting, desperate second he thought, hoped, it was Jessica. He glanced down. A notification. Someone else. Nothing from her. The silence was deafening. His chest tightened. His breath came in uneven, shallow bursts. His vision narrowed, locking onto the grand staircase at the back of the house. And then it hit him, like a weight pressing down on his lungs, suffocating, relentless. Brandon's words clung to his thoughts like poison, seeping into every corner of his mind, warping his judgment as he moved forward on unsteady legs. The warmth of the room, the golden glow of the chandeliers, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into the background, distant, meaningless. He caught glimpses of people smiling, laughing, reveling in their indulgences without a care in the world. But to Adam, it was all a blur, a hollow illusion he no longer had the patience to entertain. His reality had shrunk to a single, unavoidable truth. Upstairs. His pulse pounded in his ears as he climbed the marble staircase, each step heavier than the last. He had never belonged here. Not at this party. Not in this world. And now, as he moved further away from the noise, from the forced pleasantries and artificial smiles, he could feel the truth closing in on him. a truth he wasn't ready to face. His fingers curled into tight fists at his sides. His breathing was slow, controlled, but his heart thundered like a war drum against his ribs. At the top of the stairs, the house changed. The laughter and music below became a muffled echo. The hallway stretched out before him, lined with dim lighting and perfectly curated decor. Rich wooden paneling, tasteful artwork, the kind of carefully arranged elegance Brandon prided himself on. But Adam saw none of it. All that mattered was finding her. He had messaged her. He had waited. He had searched. And all this time, she had been here. His footsteps were quiet against the polished floor as he moved forward. He didn't know what he expected to find. Didn't even know what he would do when he found her. And then, a sound. A voice. First, muffled. Distant. But unmistakable. Jessica. His breath caught in his throat as he stopped in front of a door left slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled onto the hallway floor, stretching toward him like a cruel invitation. He shouldn't listen. He shouldn't be standing here, eavesdropping like some pathetic fool. But something in her voice made him freeze. God! I can't believe. Quiet, breathy laugh. Jessica's laugh. It cut through the crack in the door like a blade straight to his chest. Adam's body went rigid. And then Kevin's voice. Smooth, relaxed, amused. I know. It's kind of perfect. Isn't it? Meeting here, right under everyone's noses. The hallway tilted. The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. Jessica's voice followed, warm, light, too comfortable. A whole year. His stomach dropped. A year. Over a year. The words hit like sledgehammers, each syllable landing with devastating clarity. A year of believing he was coming home to a wife who loved him. A year of sitting across from her at dinner, listening to her talk about her day, never once suspecting the truth. A year of lies. His body felt disconnected, foreign. His breaths came in shallow, uneven bursts. His fingers tingled with the overwhelming urge to do something. Anything. But he couldn't move. Not yet. The casual way they spoke about him, the ease with which they discussed their deception, as if he were nothing more than an afterthought, a minor inconvenience they had learned to work around, made something inside him snap. He should have been furious. Should have kicked the door open, demanded answers, torn apart whatever twisted fantasy they had built for themselves. But all he felt in that moment was humiliation. He wasn't a husband. Wasn't even an obstacle. He was a joke. Jessica's laughter floated through the air, light, careless, utterly indifferent to the wreckage it left behind. I guess so. He doesn't ask questions. He never really does. A slow, sickening realization settled deep in his gut. She was right. He hadn't asked questions. Had never allowed himself to believe, even for a second, that Jessica could be anything other than what she had always pretended to be. Had convinced himself it was just stress, just life, just marriage. It had never been marriage. It had been him. Kevin chuckled. You ever feel bad about it? Jessica hesitated. Just for a moment. A small pause that stretched out longer than it should have. Then she sighed. Honestly? Not really. Adam felt something splinter inside him. Not really. Not even a trace of regret. He had spent years loving her, trusting her, giving her every piece of himself. And she didn't even feel bad. They hadn't even tried to hide it from each other. Had been so comfortable in their betrayal, so assured that he would never question it, so convinced that he would never matter enough to notice. He hadn't mattered. Not to Jessica. Not to Kevin. Maybe not to anyone. His breath turned shallow, sharp. His vision blurred at the edges as he stepped back, moving on instinct alone. He needed to get away from this door, away from this house, away from all of it, before he did something reckless. His hands trembled at his sides, nails biting into his palms, but the sting barely registered. His mind was a whirlwind of broken thoughts, each one cutting deeper than the last, tearing him apart. A year of deception. A year of standing in the middle of his own life, blind to the truth. He forced himself down the hallway, back toward the party, back toward the lie that had been his reality. And as he walked, One final, bitter thought settled over him, wrapping around his chest like a vice. Jessica had said she didn't feel bad. But Adam had never felt worse in his entire life. The night air was sharper than it should have been as Adam stepped outside, the heavy door of Brandon's mansion swinging shut behind him with a quiet finality. The muffled sounds of the party still carried through the thick walls. Laughter, music, meaningless chatter. But out here the world was still, empty. His breath came ragged against the cold, his body moving on autopilot as he made his way down the long driveway. Each step felt distant, disconnected, as if he weren't entirely inside his own skin. He wasn't even sure how he had made it back down the stairs, how he had walked past all those people, past Brandon, past anyone who might have noticed the vacant, hollow look in his eyes. Maybe they had noticed. Maybe they hadn't. It didn't matter. Nothing did. The valet barely spared him a glance as he handed over the keys. Adam's fingers curled around the cool metal, gripping it like an anchor. Something solid in the middle of the storm raging inside his head. His movements were mechanical as he slipped into the driver's seat, the car door shutting with a dull, muted thud. His hands found the wheel, holding on tight, as if somehow the pressure might steady him. Didn't. His breath stayed uneven. His heartbeat pounded in his chest, each echo of Jessica's voice ricocheting through his skull like a bullet that refused to stop moving. A whole year. A year of deception. A year of sneaking around. A year of knowing exactly what she was doing, and not caring. She had laughed about it, had joked about it, had sat in that room with Kevin and spoken about him like he was nothing, like he was just some clueless, irrelevant fool. A footnote in her life she had long since outgrown. Adam's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white under the strain. The engine growled to life, its roar splitting through the stillness of the night, but he barely heard it. With slow, measured movements, he eased out of the driveway, but his mind wasn't on the road. It was still back there, still in that hallway, still standing outside that half-open door. The place where his world had been split wide open, emptied, gutted, left hollow in the aftermath. The road stretched ahead of him, long and endless, the glow of streetlights casting shifting shadows over the pavement. He should have been paying attention, should have been watching the turns, the speed, the signs flashing by in his peripheral vision. But he wasn't. His mind was trapped in the past, trapped in her, Jessica. Her voice, light and careless, echoing in his head, repeating the words that had unraveled everything he thought he knew. A year, an entire year of betrayal, a full year of lying to his face, of sneaking around without the slightest hesitation, of never once fearing that he might figure it out. The words looped in his mind like a distorted, broken record, each replay sharper, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Puppet. A joke. A fool. Had it really been that easy? Had he really been that blind? His hands clenched the wheel, his jaw locking tight as another wave of humiliation crashed over him, hotter this time, burning beneath his skin like something alive. It hadn't even been a mistake. She hadn't regretted it. Adam sucked in a sharp breath, the force of it painful against his ribs. The worst part wasn't just that she had done it. It wasn't even that she had done it for an entire year. It was that she had never once considered how it might affect him. Never even paused to think that one day he might find out, might feel the ground rip out from under him, might sit here, gripping the wheel so tightly that his fingers ached, feeling like a stranger in his own life. What else had been a lie? The moments they had shared? The little gestures? The inside jokes? Had any of it been real? Or had she just been playing a role? Just passing the time while waiting for the next stolen moment with someone else? His mind twisted, pulling up memories that had once been comforting, twisting them into something jagged and ugly. The nights she came home late, kicking off her heels with a tired smile, claiming she was exhausted. The weekends she spent at networking events, her phone always face down, her attention always slightly elsewhere. Had it been him she was tired of? Had it been Kevin on her mind when she smiled to herself, scrolling through her phone? Had she looked at Adam and thought about how easy it was to fool him? His stomach churned, nausea creeping up his throat as his vision blurred. How had he not seen it? How had he missed it? Or maybe, deep down, he hadn't. Maybe, in some buried, unspoken part of himself, he had always known something was wrong. But he had ignored it, had shoved the doubts aside, had convinced himself that Jessica was his, that what they had was real, unshakable. And all the while, she had been slipping further away, piece by piece, moment by moment, until there was nothing left but the hollow shell of a marriage that had ended long before he even realized it was breaking. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus, to breathe through the tightness in his chest, to push past the storm in his mind. What now? Did he confront her? Did he walk through their front door and demand the truth? Demand an explanation? Demand to know how long she had been looking at him with pity while sneaking away with someone else? Would she even bother denying it? The thought sent another wave of nausea crashing over him, and for a brief second, he considered pulling over, considered stopping the car and just breathing. But he didn't. He kept driving, kept moving forward, even as his mind played back every moment, every lie, every whispered word behind his back that had turned him into something less. Adam's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles stark white from the pressure. The engine rumbled to life, the sound loud and jarring in the still night air, but he barely noticed. With slow, deliberate movements, he eased out of the driveway, but his mind wasn't in the car. It was still there, still in that hallway, still standing outside that door, the place where his world had cracked open, hollowed out, and left him grasping at something that no longer existed. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, the streetlights casting long, flickering shadows over the pavement. He should have been focused, should have been watching the turns, the speed, the signs flashing past in his peripheral vision. But he wasn't. His mind was stuck in a different place, stuck on her, on Jessica, on the way she had spoken about her betrayal, so casually, so easily, as if it meant nothing. The words echoed in his mind, a relentless, looping refrain, each repetition slicing deeper, sharper. Puppet. A joke. A fool. Had it really been that simple? Had he really been that blind? His fingers curled tighter around the wheel, his jaw locking as another wave of humiliation rolled through him. Hotter this time, burning under his skin like something alive, something raging to get out. It hadn't been a mistake. She hadn't regretted it. Adam inhaled sharply, the breath cutting through his chest like a blade. The worst part wasn't just that she had done it. It wasn't even that she had done it for a year. It was that she had never once stopped to consider how it might affect him. Had never thought about what would happen when he finally pieced it together. When the lies unraveled. When he realized the ground beneath him had never been solid at all. That he might be sitting here, hands locked around the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead, while feeling completely lost in his own life. What else had been a lie? The late-night conversations? The inside jokes? The quiet, tender moments that had once felt so real? Had any of it meant anything to her? Or had it all been an act? A well-rehearsed performance while she waited for the next stolen moment with him? His mind twisted, warping memories that had once been comforting, turning them into something ugly, something he could barely stand to look at. The nights she came home late, kicking off her heels, smiling as she told him she was exhausted. The weekends spent at networking events. Her phone always turned face down, her focus never quite with him. Had it been him she was tired of? Had she been thinking about Kevin when she smiled down at her phone? Had she looked at Adam and laughed to herself, marveling at how easy it was to deceive him? His stomach twisted, nausea creeping up his throat. His vision blurred at the edges. How had he not seen it? How had he missed it? Or maybe, deep down, he hadn't. Maybe, in some quiet, buried part of himself, he had always known something was wrong. But he had ignored it, had silenced the doubt, had convinced himself that Jessica was his, that their marriage was real, unshakable. And all the while, she had been slipping further and further away, piece by piece, moment by moment, until nothing remained but a hollow shell of something that had died long before he even realized it was crumbling. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus, to breathe through the tightness in his chest, to push past the chaos storming through his mind. What now? Did he confront her? Did he walk through their front door and demand the truth? Demand answers? Demand to know how long she had been looking at him with pity while slipping away with someone else? Would she even bother denying it? The thought sent another wave of nausea through him, and for a fleeting second, he considered pulling over, considered stopping the car and just breathing. But he didn't. He kept driving, kept moving forward, even as his mind dragged him back through every moment, every lie, every whispered word spoken behind his back, turning him into something less. Adam, she tried again, her voice softer now, measured, slipping into that careful, placating tone she always used when she wanted to steer him away from something. I don't know what you think you heard, but I want a DNA test. The words landed like a gunshot. Jessica went rigid. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The color drained from her face, her breath catching. Just for a fraction of a second, before she forced out another sharp laugh. This one was different, brittle, forced. What? You heard me? Adam said, his voice steady, unshaken. I want a test. I need to know if our daughter is mine. The change in her was instant. Her spine stiffened. Her eyes flickered with something raw. Something she was desperately trying to bury beneath outrage. Are you serious right now? She snapped, her voice rising. You think Adam, she's our daughter. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. I need to know. Jessica let out a breathless, bitter laugh, shaking her head like the very suggestion was an insult. Like the thought of him doubting her was more offensive than the betrayal itself. You're insane? She spat, her voice turning sharp, her panic now barely veiled behind anger. You're just trying to hurt me because you lied to me for over a year. Adam cut through her words with a finality that made her mouth snap shut. I trusted you. I built a life with you. And now, I don't even know if the one real thing I thought we had is actually mine. Her lips parted, then closed. No more laughter. No more feigned amusement. Just silence. Adam exhaled slowly, stepping back, the space between them stretching into something vast and unfixable. You want to prove me wrong? His voice was softer now, but no less lethal. Then take the test. Jessica didn't move, didn't speak, and in that moment, Adam knew. He already had his answer. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, small and unassuming, yet heavier than anything Adam had ever held. The paper inside was crisp, its edges perfectly sealed. But buried within its sterile print and meaningless numbers was the one truth that mattered. His fingers hovered over it, twitching slightly, but he didn't move to open it. Not yet, because he already knew. Somewhere deep in his gut, long before he had taken the test, he had known. Jessica had refused, of course, had screamed at him, accused him of trying to destroy their family over nothing. But beneath the fury, there had been something else. Panic. It had flashed in her eyes, quick but unmistakable. She had known what the test would say. Adam inhaled slowly, the silence of the house pressing down on him. He reached forward, his fingers slipping under the flap, tearing it open with quiet, deliberate precision. The paper unfolded easily, the black ink standing stark and clinical against the white page. His eyes scanned the words, his vision narrowed, and then, the only sentence that mattered. Probability of paternity 0%. The world didn't stop. The walls didn't collapse. The air didn't leave his lungs. He just sat there, staring at the words that confirmed what he had already felt in his bones. And felt nothing. No shock. No rage. No grief. Just the hollow, inevitable weight of it all settling over him. Like the final chapter of a story he should have seen coming from the beginning. It was done. His hands didn't tremble as he folded the paper, running his thumb along the crease before setting it back onto the table. There was no reason to look at it again. No reason to reread the details. The fact alone was enough. She wasn't his. And Jessica had known. Not just for a year. Not just since Kevin. She had known since the very beginning. Since the day she found out she was pregnant. She had carried this secret for years, had let him believe, had smiled at him through their daughter's birthdays, through every milestone, through every moment he had sat beside her bed, reading her bedtime stories, believing, trusting, that she was his. The sheer cruelty of it. The contempt it must have taken to let him live in that lie, to let him believe in something that had never been real. It settled deep into his bones, cold and unrelenting. Jessica had never loved him. Not really. She had used him, had molded him into the perfect husband. The man who provided, who stayed loyal, who never once questioned her, even as she had laughed behind his back. Adam exhaled slowly through his nose, his jaw tightening as his hands pressed against the cool surface of the table. It was over. There was nothing left to salvage. No apologies. No excuses. No carefully crafted sob stories would erase what she had done. Without a word, he stood, moving with quiet finality toward his office. His steps were steady. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing a stack of neatly arranged documents. He thumbed through the pages until he found what he was looking for. The divorce papers. They were already printed. He had done it the very next day after she had screamed at him, swearing she would never take the test. He had braced himself for a battle, had steeled himself for months of bitter, drawn-out legal warfare. But now he had leverage. He pulled the papers from the drawer, flipping to the signature line. The pen felt steady in his hand as he scrawled his name across the page, finalizing the death of a marriage that had ended long before he had realized it. There was no sadness, no hesitation, just relief. By the time Jessica came home, Adam was waiting. The envelope sat neatly beside the divorce papers, placed purposefully in the center of the kitchen table, impossible to ignore. She stepped inside, the sharp scent of her expensive perfume filling the room, her posture tight, wary. She knew. She had always known. Her gaze flicked to the envelope, then to the papers. Her breath hitched, just for a second, before she forced herself to scoff, rolling her shoulders back, slipping into the same tired routine. Another argument. Another fight she could manipulate in her favor. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, snatching the envelope with a sharp motion. "You're seriously doing this?" Adam didn't respond. She laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "So what?" she pressed, tossing the paper back onto the table like it meant nothing. "You're just going to walk away?" Adam met her stare, feeling nothing but quiet contempt. "I already have." Jessica's expression flickered. Her lips pressed into a tight, thin line. "She's still your daughter," she tried, her voice lowering, softening, reaching for something, anything, that might still hold weight. "You raised her, Adam." Adam exhaled slowly, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. "You don't get to tell me what does or doesn't change," he said, his voice calm, unwavering. "Not after this. Not after everything you've done." Her jaw clenched, a flash of anger breaking through the cracks of her carefully controlled exterior. "Fine," she snapped. "Go then. File the papers. Be a coward." He almost laughed. Years. She had spent years lying to him. Years sleeping beside him, knowing their entire marriage was built on nothing but deception. And now, he was the coward? Without a word, Adam picked up the pen from the table and held it out to her. "Sign it." Jessica's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her breath shallow, uneven. For a brief moment he thought she might refuse, might drag this out just to hurt him a little longer, just to remind herself that she still had control. But then, she snatched the pen from his hand, scrawling her name across the page in quick, angry strokes. It was done. Adam exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening slightly, the weight pressing down on him for weeks beginning to lift. Jessica shoved the papers back at him, her expression twisted with something bitter, something close to hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Adam met her gaze, his voice quiet, steady. "Oh, I won't." And for the first time in a long time, he meant it. The man who had walked into Brandon's party that night, the man who had trusted, who had believed in a woman who had never deserved it, was gone. And whoever he was now, whoever he was about to become, it would no longer be for her. Jessica no longer defined him. Her betrayal no longer bound him. He turned, walked toward the door, toward a life that was his again, a life no longer tangled in her lies, no longer wrapped in the web she had so carefully spun around him. For the first time in years, Adam was free.